dust on the horizon. The wind came first, dry, sharp, whispering like a warning across the sagebrush. Then the sound of hooves, slow and deliberate, a rhythm that didn't belong to any wanderer. Dust curled up behind the rider, a pale ghost rising against the sun. Thomas Hale did not slow his horse. He kept his eyes fixed on the shape in the distance. A small cabin crouched against the baked earth, its roof sagging under years of wind. The land was quiet except for the low moan of the breeze through the fence posts. Even the crows had gone still. He stopped at the gate that barely hung from its hinges. The horse snorted, sweat shining on its flank. Hale adjusted the brim of his hat and looked at the place he'd come to collect. A ledger lay in his saddlebag, the page marked, Elias Boyd, past due. But the name meant little now. The man who owed him was 6 feet under. Hale had come for what was left, the land, the livestock, the debt that didn't die when Elias did. He swung down from the saddle, boots sinking into powdery dirt. The sound of a baby crying drifted from inside the cabin, thin and tired. Hale hesitated only a moment before stepping onto the porch. The door opened before he could knock. A woman stood there, framed by dim light and dust. Barefoot, hair pulled back, eyes too old for her young face. A baby rested against her shoulder, one arm around its legs, the other holding the door steady, as if it might fall. "Mrs. Boyd," Hale said, tipping his hat. His voice came out rough, dry as the land. She didn't answer. Her gaze moved from his boots to his coat, to the faint gold chain of a pocket watch at his vest. She took in the polished saddle behind him, the fine horse, the man who did not sweat though the sun was merciless. "You've come about the land," she said quietly. "Not a question." "I have." Hale reached into his coat and pulled out the folded ledger page. "Your husband owed me $800. Been nearly 2 years. I'm here to settle it." The baby stirred, and she hushed it with a hand that trembled once, then steadied. "You'll have to take it in patience, Mr. Hale. There's no money here." He looked past her. Inside, the room was bare but clean. A pot simmered on the stove. 2 small boys sat at a rough-hewn table carving bits of wood, their faces smudged with dirt and sunlight. A girl no older than 10 was sweeping the floor with a broom nearly twice her height. Hale's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to take what feeds your children. I came for what's owed." "Then you've come for ghosts," she said. "My husband took them with him." The wind caught her hair then, lifting a loose strand across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. Her eyes stayed fixed on his, steady, unreadable, a quiet defiance he'd seen before in men who refused to yield. He should have turned, mounted, and left her to her poverty. That was the way of things. But he didn't. He looked again at the house, at the thin smoke curling from the stovepipe, at the worn toys by the door. "You got stock?" he asked. 2 cows, 3 hens, and a field that hasn't given us much since the drought. "Then you've got land. Land that don't feed," she replied, her tone clipped, the baby shifting in her arms. "You'll be taking that too?" Hale exhaled through his nose, long and slow. The air tasted of dust and sunlight. "Ain't my wish to throw out children. But the law's the law. The debt stands. Then I'll pay it in work." He blinked. "Work? I can mend, cook, clean, tend cattle. You'll get your debt's worth, but not a roof plank from this house leaves till it's done." The boldness in her voice caught him off guard. He studied her face again, the sharp line of her jaw, the tired hollows beneath her eyes, the baby's hand gripping her dress. "That'd take you years," he said. "Then it'll take years." The two of them stood there, the world narrowing to that porch, that dust, that silence. Behind her, one of the children, little Jacob, watched him with eyes that carried both fear and challenge. Finally, Hale said, "1 week. I'll give you that long before I claim what's owed." She nodded once. "No thank you offered. Then you'll have your answer in a week." He stepped back. The wind pushed at his coat. She closed the door gently, not in anger, but in finality. Hale walked back to his horse, swung into the saddle, and turned toward the open plain. The sun was low now, bleeding orange through the heat haze. As he rode away, he glanced back once, saw the faint outline of her through the window, rocking the baby while the others gathered close. A sound drifted across the land, a child's laugh, brief and bright, quickly swallowed by the wind. He rode on. The road stretched endless ahead, flat and unforgiving. But for the first time in years, the weight in his chest didn't come from the ledger at his side. It came from what he'd left behind, a woman who faced him not with tears, but with the kind of courage that comes when you've got nothing left to lose. By the time he reached the ridge, the cabin was just a dark smudge against the dying light. He pulled the reins and looked back. The sky burned crimson above the valley, and the wind whispered through the grass like the voice of an old story that never quite ended. Sometimes, he muttered, half to the dust, half to himself, the poorest folks pay the richest lessons. Then he turned his horse west, the sun sinking behind him, the sound of the wind carrying the faint echo of a baby's cry, soft, steady, and stubborn as life itself. And somewhere far off, in the hush between one breath and the next, the land seemed to murmur its own truth, that some debts are heavier than gold, and some hearts richer than any man's name in a ledger. The widow's hands. The hammer struck the fence post again and again, the sound sharp as a gunshot under the noon sun. Sweat rolled down Clara Boyd's neck, dust clinging to her skin. The earth was dry as bone, cracked and stubborn, refusing every nail she drove into it. "Hold it straight, Jacob," she said, voice thin but steady. The boy grunted, both hands gripping the post, arms trembling. He was barely 12, but there was no one else to help. Behind them, the baby cried from inside the cabin. The younger children chased chickens through the yard, their laughter wild and fleeting against the still air. From a ridge came the soft creak of leather and the dull thud of hooves. Clara didn't need to look up. She already knew the sound of his horse. Thomas Hale reined in near the gate, eyes sweeping over the half-fixed fence, the patchy field beyond. He said nothing at first, only dismounted and walked toward her, dust curling around his boots. "You've been busy," he said finally. She didn't answer, just lifted another plank and set it against the frame. The hammer came down again. Hale watched her hands, small, scarred, sun-browned. There was blood on her knuckles, blisters open and raw. But she swung that hammer like she meant to break the world in half. "Fence won't keep much out," he said. "It'll keep my children in," she replied without looking up. Hale adjusted his hat, watching the boy straighten under her words. "That field looks dead." "Everything's dead till you work it long enough," she said. "Same with land. Same with people." For a moment, the only sound was the steady crack of wood and the whisper of wind. Hale stepped closer, picking up a fallen nail. He turned it between his fingers before handing it to her. "You don't quit easy," he said. I don't know how. Something in her tone. Not pride, not defiance, just simple truth stuck in his chest like a burr. She took the nail, drove it in, and finally stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "You came to watch or to help?" He hesitated, then took the hammer from her hand. It felt strange, years since he'd done anything that wasn't counting, collecting, commanding. He lifted the next plank and began to strike. The first swing was awkward. The second found its rhythm. The third landed clean. Clara gave a short nod. "You'll do." The faintest hint of a smile crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. By late afternoon, the fence line stood mended, crooked but strong. Hale leaned against a post, breathing hard. The boy had long since gone to fetch water. Clara stood a few yards off, shading her eyes as she looked over the land. "Elias used to fix fences like this," she said quietly. Said a man's worth was in how well he held the line. Hale said nothing. He came back from the war, not the same. Said he heard things at night, saw faces that weren't there. Her voice softened. Whiskey was the only thing that drowned them. Hale turned his eyes to the horizon. "War don't end when the shooting stops. You know something about that?" He didn't answer, but the shadow that crossed his face was enough. The silence stretched. From the house came the faint sound of a lullaby, the girl singing to the baby, off-key but tender. Clara drew her hands across her apron, studying the blisters. "You said a week," she murmured. "I did. And what'll you do when the week's gone?" "Depend what I see by then." She met his gaze. "And what do you see now?" He paused. More fight than I figured. She almost smiled, but instead turned and started toward the house. Then you haven't seen near enough yet. That evening, Hale stayed longer than he meant to. The sun was low, throwing red across the sky. He sat on the porch, cup of black coffee in his hand, watching the widow tend to her children. The babies slept in her arms. The little ones played with sticks and stones in the dust. Jacob was sharpening an old knife, his jaw set too hard for a boy his age. "You don't get much rest," Hale said. "Rest don't plow fields," she replied softly. He looked at her hands again, the same hands that had driven nails and milked cows, wiped tears, and buried a husband. "You'll ruin those." "They were ruined long ago," she said, eyes fixed on the fading light. From down the road, the wind shifted, carrying faint voices, a snatch of laughter that didn't belong. Hale's hand went to the revolver at his belt. Clara noticed. "Riders?" He nodded slightly. "2, maybe 3, coming from the east." Her eyes narrowed. "McCready's." He looked at her. "You know them. Everyone here does. They take what isn't theirs. Been watching the valley since Elias passed." The baby stirred, and she hushed it quickly. Hale kept his gaze on the distant horizon until the sound faded. Only then did he relax his grip. "You should have someone watching this place," he said. "I do." Her tone carried no boast, no fear, just quiet certainty. Hale studied her, the last light glinting off his watch chain. "You're not what I expected, Mrs. Boyd." "No one ever is, Mr. Hale," she said. "That's what keeps the world turning." He finished his coffee, stood, and placed the cup on the rail. "I'll be back tomorrow." "For the fence or the debt?" "For both." He walked to his horse, the air cooling fast as the desert traded sun for stars. She watched him mount and ride off, the rhythm of hooves fading into the dark. When he disappeared over the ridge, Clara looked down at her hands again. The moonlight caught the rough edges of her palms, the scars where skin had split and healed. She flexed her fingers once, slow and deliberate, then turned toward the door. Inside, her children waited. The night pressed close around the house, and in the quiet between the wind sighs, the widow whispered to the dark, "Let them come if they must. I've got work left yet." Outside, the field shimmered faintly under the silver sky, the fence line standing crooked but proud, a boundary not just of land, but of will. And up on the far ridge, unseen in the dark, a lone figure on horseback paused and watched the cabin lights flicker. The storyteller's voice rose low and rough, as if carried on the desert wind. "They say a woman's hands can heal or harm, feed or fight, hold or let go. But the widow of Red Mesa, her hands built fences out of grief and turned debt into something a man like Hale had never known, respect." The shadows at sundown. The horses came at sundown, 3 of them, cutting silhouettes against the red sky. Dust rose from the ridge in long, low ribbons, catching the dying light. Claire saw them first. She was carrying a bucket from the well when the sound reached her. Slow hoofbeats, heavy, deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to travelers. She froze, her eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Inside, Jacob's voice broke the quiet. "Ma!" "Inside," she said, setting the bucket down. "Now." The boy hesitated, then obeyed, pulling the door shut behind him. The yard fell still except for the restless wind brushing the dry grass. A moment later, another sound joined the wind, the clink of spurs. Thomas Hale rode in from the south, dust on his coat, face grim. He swung down from the saddle, eyes already scanning the horizon. "You see him too?" Clara gave a single nod. 3 riders. East Ridge. McCready's, likely. "They've been following me since town," Hale said, checking the revolver at his hip. "Figured they'd try for this place before the moon's up." She moved past him to the porch, unlatching the door just enough to speak inside. "Jacob, close the shutters. Get the little ones under the table." Then she turned back to Hale. "We got maybe 10 minutes." Hale studied her, the calm in her voice sharper than any weapon. "You got rifles?" "1 old Winchester, 2 rounds left, and a scattergun that misfires more than not." He gave a short nod. "I'll take the Winchester." She didn't argue. Inside the house, wood creaked, shutters slammed. The faint sound of a child whimpering bled through the walls. Clara moved to the barn, Hale following close. The air inside was thick with hay and silence. She reached behind a loose plank, pulling free the rifle. The metal caught the last of the light, gleaming faintly. Hale took it, tested the lever. Still fire straight. "So do I," she said. He turned, the line of her shoulders taut, her eyes steady and cold. There was something in that look, something old, practiced, dangerous. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, just stepped past him, loading the second round with a clean motion that spoke more than words. Outside, the first echo of laughter drifted down from the ridge. Harsh, cruel, too close. The McCready brothers had arrived. The sun was gone now, and the valley had turned to copper and shadow. Hale crouched near the fence, rifle steady. Clara stood at the porch rail, the shotgun braced against her hip. Voices carried down the slope. "Evening, Widow Boyd," one called, his tone oily. "Heard you got company. Thought we'd drop by. See if the man of the house wants to share his supper." Clara said nothing. Her finger rested light on the trigger. Hale's jaw flexed. He raised a rifle, sighted the ridge. The riders came into view. 3 of them, faces hidden under brimmed hats, rifles slung low. The leader, a broad man with a red scarf at his throat, grinned when he spotted her. "Now ain't that a picture?" he sneered. "Widow and her warden." "Turn around," Hale said, voice cutting through the still air. The leader chuckled. "Don't reckon we will." He lifted his hand. The motion was small, but the meaning was clear. The first shot cracked through the valley like lightning. Hale dropped one man from the saddle before the echo even faded. The others wheeled their horses, firing wild. Bullets tore through fence boards, splinters flying. Clara ducked behind the porch post, swung out, and fired the scattergun. The blast was thunder. One outlaw's hat flew, his shoulder twisting in blood. The baby inside began to cry. "Keep down," Hale shouted toward the house. He chambered his last round and waited. The leader dismounted, crouching behind a boulder, his voice snarling from the dark. "You'll pay for that, rancher." But Hale wasn't listening. His eyes were on Clara. She dropped the shotgun and reached for the rifle slung over the porch beam. It wasn't his Winchester. It was older, shorter, modified. Her hands moved fast, sure. Too sure. She leaned into the post, breathed once, and fired. The leader fell before he could rise again. One clean shot, straight through the throat. The valley went quiet except for the hiss of wind through the brush. Hale stared at her, the rifle smoke curling in the air. "Where'd you?" She lowered the weapon slowly. "Used to be they call me Red Mesa Ghost," she said, voice low. "Scout for the Union. 40 kills. Most folks never saw the shot." Hale blinked, stunned silent. Elias didn't know, he managed. He didn't want to. She broke the rifle open, checked the chamber, then set it down. Some ghosts are better left buried. The last surviving outlaw tried to crawl for his horse. Hale walked over and kicked the gun from his hand. "Tell your kind this land's not theirs," he said coldly. "Not anymore." The man stumbled up, blood on his sleeve, fear in his eyes. He didn't look back as he rode off into the dusk. When the sound of hooves faded, Hale turned toward the porch. Clara was sitting on the step, hands trembling for the first time all night. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded once, staring at the horizon. "Children, safe." They sat in silence, listening to the wind slide through the canyons. The air smelled of gunpowder and sage. After a long while, she spoke again. "You came for a debt, Mr. Hale. Seems I've paid it." He looked down at the rifle beside her, then at the torn ledger page peeking from his coat. "Not the kind I meant to collect." Clara's eyes lifted to his, gray, steady, endless as the desert sky. "Then maybe it's time to decide what kind you will." The light was almost gone now. The land glowed in the last bruised tones of twilight, every color fading to ash and gold. Hale stood, holstered his revolver, and offered his hand. She took it, rising slow. Her grip was strong despite the tremor. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll bury the dead." "And the past," she added. He nodded once. From somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry threading through the valley like the end of an old song. The storyteller's voice came then, worn and rough, drifting like smoke through the dusk. That night, Red Mesa remembered its ghost, and the man who came to take turned instead to guard. For when bullets stop singing and dust settles slow, all that's left is what a soul chooses to keep, and what it's brave enough to let go. The reckoning at Widow's Creek. Rain lashed the parched earth like the sky itself was weeping. The old oak by the widow's porch groaned in the wind, its branches clawing the black clouds. Lantern light flickered through the cabin window, warm against the storm's fury. Inside, Clara stood still as stone, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the silhouette moving through the sheets of rain. Cole Hollister, the wealthy rancher come to collect his due. Only now his debt wasn't money, it was truth. The door creaked open before he could knock. The children slept in the loft, their shallow breaths the only sound besides the storm. Clara stepped aside, motioning him in, her face ghostly in the lamplight. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, voice low, trembling like the flame between them. He removed his hat, water dripping from the brim. "I ain't one to run from ghosts, ma'am, even the ones wearing your eyes." Her grip tightened on the rifle. "Then maybe you should have stayed dead with the rest of them." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls. The scent of gun oil and wet earth filled the cabin. Cole's eyes traveled to the corner where an old army coat hung, faded blue, stitched with a silver emblem. He remembered it. He remembered him. Jonas Reed, he muttered. "Your husband. A good man. A soldier who saved my hide once." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then, you remember the day you left him behind at San Felipe Creek?" Cole's jaw hardened. "I remember orders. I remember a battle that turned to hell. And I remember seeing him fall." "You remember lying?" She cut in, eyes flashing like lightning. "You told the report he deserted. That's why the army sent me nothing but a sealed letter and an empty grave." Cole didn't answer. The wind slammed the door shut, and for a second the cabin went dark. The thunder rolled like distant cannon fire. When the lantern steadied again, Clara's tears had vanished, replaced by steel. "I know what you came for," she said. "The land, the deed, the last piece of this ranch your company wants. But before you take it, you're going to tell me why. Why a rich man like you needs to steal from the widow of a man who saved his life." Cole looked away, his voice low. "Because I was bought, Clara, bought by the same men who buried Jonas in silence. The Hollister Company's been dirty a long while, and I've been their face. But I didn't come here tonight for your land." Her eyes narrowed. "Then for what?" He reached into his coat, slow and deliberate. Clara raised the rifle, ready to fire. But instead of a gun, he pulled out a folded packet, weathered, sealed with a faded government stamp. "His name," Cole said, placing it on the table. "Cleared. Full pardon. Proof he never deserted. Took me 10 years to dig it out from under the bastards who wrote it wrong." Clara stared at the papers like they were glowing. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, but stopped halfway. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because they're coming for me, too," he said, his voice gravel low. "I wouldn't let him take this land from you, or from his children. They sent men. They'll be here before dawn." Thunder cracked, sharp and final. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed through the rain. Clara's head turned toward the window. Shadows moved at the edge of the yard. 3, maybe 4 riders, rifles slung low. Cole drew his revolver. "You got a back door?" Clara nodded once. "Out by the shed. But I ain't running." He gave a faint smile. "Didn't think you would." The first bullet shattered the window. The lantern burst, plunging the room into chaos and sparks. Cole rolled toward the door, returning fire. Muzzle flashes lit the rain, sharp and staccato. Clara dropped behind the table, reloading her rifle with practiced calm. Another shot tore through the wall. One of the children cried upstairs. "Stay down," Clara shouted. Cole kicked the door open and stepped into the storm. The men were dismounting, silhouettes against the lightning. He fired once, twice, dropped one before the others ducked behind the water trough. Then Clara was beside him, barefoot, soaked, her nightgown clinging like a second skin. She steadied the rifle on the porch rail, eyes cold and sure. "You ain't talking my husband's home," she said. Cole glanced at her, rain streaming down his face, his revolver smoking. Reckon they picked the wrong widow to cross. The gunfight roared. Bullets sparked off the well stones, tore through fence posts, kicked up mud and blood. One rider charged, screaming into the wind. Clara's rifle cracked, and he fell, silent mid-yell. The last man tried to flee. Cole stepped off the porch, fired once more. The gunshot echoed through the valley, swallowed by the storm. Then quiet, just rain. Clara lowered the rifle, chest heaving. Cole staggered, clutching his side where blood darkened his coat. She caught him before he fell. "Easy," she said. "You'll live." He smiled faintly. Wouldn't bet the ranch on it. She dragged him inside, laid him on the rug before the cold hearth. Lightning flashed through the broken window, washing his face pale. He reached up, pressing the folded letter into her palm. "Promise me you'll tell him the truth. About Jonas. About tonight." Clara nodded, tears welling. "I will." He closed his eyes, breathing slow, shallow. "Tell the boy he looks like his father." The thunder rolled again, long and low, like the growl of time itself. And when it faded, Cole Hollister was still. Clara sat in silence for a long while. Then she rose, wiped the blood from her hands, and picked up the letter. Outside, the dawn broke, a thin line of gold cutting through the storm clouds. She stepped out onto the porch, rifle across her arm, watching the light crawl over the land her husband had died for. Behind her, 5 children stirred awake. And out on the horizon, the sun caught the old army coat hanging on the wall, its emblem glinting like a medal returned at last. An old storyteller's voice would later whisper this tale across the years. They said the widow at Widow's Creek faced down hell itself that night, that a rich man came to take her home, and instead found his redemption. And when the thunder rolled no more, justice rode the wind, wearing her name.